If we respect the environment, it will respect us. So we all have to play our part.
We were really in trouble of losing some species in my lifetime. And this can wreak havoc on the balance of the ecosystem.
People need nature, and people must take care of nature.
I am part of the next generation that have to make sure that this place survives.
It is our responsibility as the two-leggeds to try to foster good relationships with Earth. It's beginning now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining National Geographic and Campaign for Nature here in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. How's everyone doing? It's been a long COP. Looks like some tired faces, but still some energy left. All right. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we are excited to be here on Solutions Day because we want to talk about a solution that works both in COP27 and importantly coming up in COP15. My name is Brian O'Donnell. I'm the director of Campaign for Nature. Today we're here to talk in Sharm el-Sheikh obviously about the climate crisis, but an overlooked portion of the climate crisis is the role that nature plays. We know that nature can provide more than a third of the solution to the climate crisis. We also know that we have a similar crisis facing biodiversity. Both of these crises are important to all life on Earth. And together, if we solve these in a joint way, we can ensure a viable future for people and for the nature that we all love. In a few weeks, another COP will start in Montreal, COP15. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address the biodiversity crisis. In that COP will be a target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's lands and oceans, and do so in a way that respects and empowers the rights of indigenous peoples and their leadership in conservation. We know that that is a key component to addressing both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And we're going to have an exciting panel here with leaders from around the world who will talk about the 30 by 30 movement, the rights of indigenous people in that movement, and how we can both help solve the climate crisis and help solve the biodiversity crisis by protecting our lands and our oceans and making sure we listen to and center the voices of indigenous peoples and local communities. So with that, I want to first welcome some incredible panelists. We have two ministers here, which is a real treat for us, and we recognize how busy you are in these negotiations, and we want to respect your time. I first want to invite with the minister from Samoa, Honorable Minister Schuster, who is here to make an announcement about the commitment of the people of Samoa and the leadership of the people of Samoa for the conservation of oceans and land.
Thank you, Brent. I know it's we in the Pacific we've developed a Blue Pacific continent strategy, of which all the Pacific Island nations have committed to supporting the issue of conservation, of marine conservation. And as for Samoa, we have developed our Samoa Ocean Strategy, which we've committed to 30% of our forest, of our marine resources. Within our biodiversity strategy, we've also identified the need to increase our protection of our terrestrial living. So this campaign is very important for us, and we're also working with other small island states as part of our Small Island SIDS Alliance that we will also launch together at the next COP. But in terms of why I think the faces I see here, you're all committed to, and you all understand the importance of biodiversity. For us as small island nations, we have limited resources. Our limited biodiversity, if we don't look after it, not only the next is the impact of climate change is going to affect us because of others, but at least within the biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity, we have our role to play by protecting and looking at ways to improve and sustainably manage our terrestrial biodiversity. I don't know if that's good enough for it, but we're glad to join this alliance. We look forward to working with our brothers in the Pacific to continue to join, and as well as the Alliance of Small Island States, because as we continue to talk at this COP, we're at the forefront. We're bearing the brunt of climate change, and we need to stand and look at every opportunity that will ensure us that we have other constituents that will stand with us to help in our goal of 1.5 degrees, and this is one of the ways that we totally support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Schuster. I was told that some folks in the back couldn't hear. How is it now? Can you hear us okay or no? Little bit. Still need a little louder. Okay. Well, we are grateful for the leadership of Samoa, and they just announced, for those of you who didn't hear, that they will be joining the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which is an alliance of now more than 112 countries that have endorsed the global target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's lands and oceans. And as we said in the beginning, there's no pathway to reach the 1.5 degree climate goal if we don't protect, conserve nature. So this is an exciting announcement, and we're grateful to have you here. I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the seats now. We're going to have a discussion and some Q&A. The first panelist that I would like to welcome is the Honorable Collins Nzovu, who is the Minister of Green Economy and Environment. He's been in that position since September of 2021. Please come on up, Minister. And also, I'd like to welcome K.M. Reyes, who is a National Geographic explorer, a community organizer, and conservationist, she also has a fan club here, I see, from the Philippines. Also, Kaluko Paul Matuku, who is a Kenyan climate activist and environmentalist, who's working to improve youth participation in the environment. And Dr. Solange Bandiaki Baji, who is the president of Rights Resources Initiative and a close partner with Campaign for Nature. We work regularly every week, so good to see you here, Solange. Yes, you can. So we're going to start with some remarks from the panelists, and afterwards I'm going to be asking a few questions from the panelists. Oh, yes, Curlin. I didn't. Sorry. We also have one more panelist here. I did not realize he had made it to the room. So we have Curlin, who is the director of the Okavanga Wilderness Project. So thank you for joining us as well. So we're going to start with the minister, who is also a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. So we're proud to see the leadership of Zambia, and we can start with your introductory remarks.
Hello. Is it good afternoon or is it good morning? Indeed, we consider this subject very, very, very important. For us, indeed, we joined the High Ambition Coalition, the 30 by 30, with open hands, and we want to ensure that it succeeds. Coming into COP27, we're very, very clear what our results should be. One of the major results, obviously, is to push the developed world to increase their ambition on mitigation. We believe that a push on ambition resulting in low CO2 emissions is good for biodiversity protection. There's a clear link. Where I come from, we are very, very clear about how we want to ensure that we green our economy, and the resultant effects or results coming from ensuring that the economy is green is because we believe that without nature protection, the very survival of us is doomed. I come from an area where people depend on nature. the very livelihoods of our people are dependent on the natural resources God has given us. Losing these as a result of the climate crisis, as a result of our partners not increasing our ambition, as a result of low adaptation funding, as a result of really protecting them, would be disastrous. As Zambia, we look forward to a successful COP15. We need to ensure that there are red lines, clear red lines to which every country must be held to. We need to measure progress. I want to urge everybody of you to speak and speak more with louder voices. As we go on, we'll be able to contribute more, but we believe that protecting nature is protecting ourselves. And we need to sing this song more and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. A quick question to follow up for you. Your ministry is new. The title is new on the world. We don't see many ministries that combine green development with conservation, and it's an exciting prospect. Can you tell us a little bit about how nature plays in the role of the development of Zambia and how the conservation of nature can fit into the future of your country?
Thank you. I think that's a very, very important question. For us, coming into government, we were very, very clear how we wanted to develop our economy. We depend on minerals, we depend on tourism, the animals, we depend on water resources. We also are aware that we need to join the energy transition. This is a pathway we set for ourselves, creating this ministry. It's called the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. So a green economy meaning low carbon, meaning resource efficiency, meaning social inclusivity, the very people we are leading, bringing them out of abject poverty, meaning the other pillar is on environmental sustainability. We are worried in there to ensuring that our biodiversity is not lost. We come from a region where the biodiversity is very, very rich, but because of climate change, we are losing it. Now, how do we, on one side, protect our environment, protect our biodiversity, and on the other side, develop our economy? So this is an equation we are trying to resolve in the ministry. And we're very, very clear what our red lines are. How do we, from the mining sector, for example, how do we ensure that we reduce pollution? We've come up with the necessary legislation as well, the necessary institutional framework. So we're not just talking, we are making the laws to speaking to ensuring that biodiversity is not lost. For areas where there's a huge loss, we're trying to see how it's restored so that it's a two-way thing, restoration and prevention. But we prefer more to prevent biodiversity loss. And we need to speak and speak more loudly on this matter. It's very, very important. We believe that this is a matter which, when taken care of very well, the survival of humankind will be guaranteed. So it shouldn't be secondary. It should be actually at the top of our agenda. In any case, we depend on nature for our survival, for our everyday lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nzovo. And I want to recognize that both Minister Nzovo and Minister Schuster are incredibly busy and also negotiating the agreement here in Sharm el-Sheikh. So we welcome you to stay as long as you can, but understand if you have to leave at any time.
Thank you, and the audience, you forgive us. We may have to leave early because we are going to another meeting. But just to assure yourselves that we are with you and that your aspirations and our aspirations. I personally, to tell you that I've been lobbying other ministers to speak to this. Even as we negotiate, I'm leading the African group of negotiators. Issues of biodiversity loss are on the table. The connection is very, very clear. So you have partners in Africa, you have partners in Asia, you have partners everywhere, but we will remain a strong voice for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is one of the most hopeful announcements I've heard all week, and we are really grateful for your leadership and wish you wish you good luck in the negotiations. I'm going to turn it over to Curlin Costa, who is a National Geographic explorer who leads the Okavango Wilderness Project. And you are in one of the most biodiverse regions of the world, one of the last major big intact freshwater systems on the planet. Can you tell us how protecting nature is critical to the economies worldwide? And can you talk more about the specific impacts of the Okavango Delta and how the success there could be achieved elsewhere in the world?
Thank you for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. Like the Honorable Minister said, we depend on natural resources, and there's no way we can talk about conservation, development without evaluating our own economical system. We depend on an economical system that is extracting in a very unsustainable way these resources. So I think the point is we need to evaluate what is necessity, what is that we need to exist in order to talk about conservation. Because we can dialogue a lot about conservation, but if you keep existing in the same economical system, it's definitely not sustainable. And then in terms of the economy around the Okavango Delta, you can see that the delta in Botswana, although the major hydrographic basin is actually in Angola and all the water is coming from Angola, the delta in Botswana is an example of how an economy can be built around the environment. That said, there are a lot of mistakes done in the Okavango Delta, but it's an example. And I think we can look at that example and actually pick on the errors, on the mistakes, because, for example, in conservation, we're not including humans in this topic. We seem to separate humans and environment, and that's a big mistake because, well, at least for the communities that live in this environment, they live there, they depend on those resources, and they depend on those resources directly. So if you're not looking at their lifestyles, their culture, their values, which is what has allowed these environments to be pristine up until today, we're not going to be able to talk about conservation. So I think in terms of an economy based in natural resources and in this case in tourism, I think it needs to be reevaluated to actually learn why or what have these communities been doing that has allowed this environment to be pristine. And when we develop such economy, they need to be included. Their ways need to be respected, and their vision for the future need to be also taken into account.
Thank you so much, Curlin. I'm going to catch him off guard with a question that we didn't prep for, but I want to ask you, you've been to one of this place, which is a magical place. I haven't had the luxury and the experience to go there sometime. Tell us a little about it. Why is it such a magical place for you? Why do you love it?
So as much as the world knows the Delta is not the most special place. The special place is in Angola, where all the water that goes into the Delta is born. So we have this part in southern eastern Angola that for the past 40 to 50 years has been closed because of the civil war. So it is actually super pristine. It's one of the last few remote pristine wildernesses in the world, and we're talking about hundreds of pristine rivers, the second biggest subtropical forest in the world, the second biggest pit soil system in the world. So it's like a capsule lost in time, and I think as an Angolan it's a great opportunity to actually learn from these mistakes around us to create something that not only protects but allows us to develop in an exemplary way.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it over to KM Reyes. KM is a National Geographic explorer, and she's a community organizer who has worked to protect and conserve the areas of her favorite parts of the Philippines. She is going to talk a little bit about how she has worked with local communities, the lessons she has learned, and why working with communities is so important to achieve conservation.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm KM from the Philippines. Hi in the background. But before I start, I'd really like to acknowledge place. Egypt, from the pyramids to the Red Sea, is a country of unparalleled historical importance and spectacular natural wonder. But not now or ever will we overcome our dual climate and biodiversity crises without human rights. I stand with British Egyptian, Ala Abdel Fattah, Mohammed Oxygen Ibrahim, Hoda Abdel Monaim, Hisham Fuad, Ziad El Alaimi, and all political prisoners here and across the global south who fight so I may have the freedom to be on this panel today. I also feel like this COP27, many of us have sat here in the nature zone and across pavilions and events discussing what's needed, and actually we all already know. It boils down ultimately to recognizing IPLC rights and giving groups like mine the funding to do it. The only thing I can ask specifically that I haven't really heard and actually sounds really mundane is around these IPLC pledges that are going around. If you're a donor, any donors here in the room, you're scot-free today. But if you know of any donors, I ask that if you pledge to fund directly to IPLCs, then publish it on your website. Because none of us on the ground know how to get this funding that apparently is being thrown around at huge amounts. And then connected to this is possibly also trying to connect all of these grants in one centralized hub. So for those of you who have the power, I know we have the Path to Scale group, please connect. It would be great if all of the IPLCs around the world could actually find these grants. And if it has to be through an INGO, then great, but please just let us know so we know how to get it. But besides this, I don't think I can add any more than what's already been said. So instead, I actually want to capitalize on this opportunity to talk a little bit about my story at the Center for Sustainability PH, which really is a story about possibility for frontline communities. I also want to share this story because I feel that Southeast Asia, at global conferences and especially at the climate COPs, is very little represented. And so I wanted to kind of share a little bit about my corner of the world today. So bear with me, I'm going to try and zip through it really quickly, Brian. So I'm coming from Palawan, a far-flung island closer to Borneo than mainland Philippines. We are karst mountains and dense, pristine rainforests, alive with birdsong before dramatically dropping down to pearly white sand beaches over turquoise waters and teeming coral reefs. We're a World Biosphere Reserve, home to 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We are made up of 8 distinct groups of indigenous peoples, still retaining culture and tradition on ancestral lands and waters. Palawan alone is home to 232 endemic species. Once upon a time, my country was 90 to 95% covered in pristine rainforests. Now, only 3% of that rainforest is left. And yet the Philippines is still one of only 17 mega-biodiverse countries, and the majority of this natural wealth is found on my island, Palawan. But our island is now increasingly under threat from mining companies for electric car minerals and rich oil reserves, and deforestation for modern development and unsustainable tourism. It's also the 3rd most dangerous country globally for land defenders like myself, after Colombia and Mexico. So with 5 of my colleagues, we decided a few years ago to found the Center for Sustainability PH. We're from the tribes of the Cuyunan and Tagbanwa, and we established this organization to protect the last remaining 3% of pristine rainforest through legal establishment of protected areas. And we started in the place where I believe all change makers should, our backyard. And it's a place actually called Cleopatra's Needle, so called for the highest obelisk peak of this sprawling and lush rainforest with rivers, streams, and creeks coursing down the rolling mountains like veins. Over 4 years, we mobilized our communities, riding off-road, hiking through rivers. I drowned my motorcycle quite a few times. I was very cocky, and I've now learned my lesson. We secured the FPIC, the free and prior informed consent, from our communities. We also learned some tough lessons. We didn't do FPIC the right way in some communities, and we got kicked out. We were told that we didn't listen properly, and so that was a big lesson for us. We also facilitated scientific research, and very importantly, we lobbied to our politicians. And after 4 years of hustle, bravado, and fake it till we make it, we got the piece of paper, and we got a law recognizing Cleopatra's Needle as a critical habitat under the Philippine Wildlife Act. It's now over 41,000 hectares of protected area. It's 2.5 times the size of Sharm el-Sheikh. It's home to 31 IUCN globally threatened species, 61 Palawan endemic species, and is the ancestral domain of the disappearing Batak tribe. Many of you won't know this tribe. There's only 200 members left on the entire planet, and they reside in this forest. It's also home to the #1 poached animal globally, the pangolin. And so we did it. So I share this as a story of possibility for 2 reasons. Number 1, all of this we did with $170,000. That's it, over 4 years. And this is the same as 5 delegates staying at the Four Seasons Hotel for COP27. It's that affordable. And secondly, I tell this story because at the time we were 6 youth. Our youngest member was 17 years old, and between all of us, we had 3 university degrees. So I say this because we talk a lot about IPLCs and the lack of capacity, and that we're not sure about the mechanisms to fund them. We don't need all of these Western degrees to do it. Just give us a chance, and honestly, just give us the money. We really don't need that much. We don't need 1.75 billion or whatever the last pledge was. We really need a lot less than that. And so, yeah, this is my story, and this is why I think it's so important to support IPLCs.
Thank you, KM. That was inspiring. We all have a debt of gratitude for your work, the sacrifice you made, and of course for the people in those communities who put their lives on the line every day to make this possible. I'm now going to turn to Kaluki Paul Matuku. Kaluki is a Kenyan climate activist and environmentalist working to improve youth participation in decision-making around climate justice. He's a regional director for Africa for Youth for Nature, and he has been an inspiration for how we engage youth and engage community in conservation. So I wanted to ask you specifically about that. How, in your experiences, have you seen youth become a global force and a local force for change and for conservation?
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. I'm not sure I can match up to your energy, but I see she's pretty much youth, and working on restoration. I believe we can never deny the youth a chance again to believe in them and to lead on restoration for 3 key reasons. Number 1, we comprise a huge proportion of the world's population, right? And I think this is an opportunity for us to see how we can engage young people who has the energy, the innovation, and the time to actually fail forward to create solutions for the against the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss. But they're also the same people who are every time organizing and creating solidarity to exactly work with their peers, to work with other like components of the society for intergenerational engagements around restoration. I also think young people are, for lack of a better word, the most affordable to work with. That we are not so expensive, like she said, right? We don't need $1 million investments to actually carry on restoration projects on the ground. We at times just need the will from our leaders. We just need the welcoming from NGOs, and we just need the involvement to be able to contribute our ideas and bring our solutions to the table. And the last thing is, I believe young people are fashionable in nature. We just need to make ecosystem restoration sexy for youth. We need to make it very enticing for them to actually see a value for it. And just drawing back to the 30 by 30 ambition, I think for me, it's a good initiative, but the question is it the end? No. It is just the bare minimum. If we must protect the world's land and seascapes, then we must see 30 by 30 is just the beginning point to what we should have done years ago. But we need to increase the ambition. We need to work with not just young people. We need to work with local farmers. We need to work with women. We need to work with IPLCs, because all these are the custodians who we have a chance to actually ensure and secure our future. And I learned by saying, nature never needs us, but we need nature. So by protecting nature, we are actually safeguarding ourselves. Thank you.
Kaluki, I want to ask you one more question. you are also a climate activist, and you talked a lot about nature. Tell us how you work day in on climate, and then you work day in on nature. How are these issues related? Are you seeing the synergies that we need to solve these problems, or are people still too isolated when they think about these things?
Interesting question. I don't think there is any crisis that is a crisis on its own. They are all very closely linked to each other, that we cannot afford to separate them. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, they are all linked together. And so as a climate activist, I'm not just in the streets shouting and throwing stones and whatever people think about, but we are actually working with communities to iterate programs that will actually deliver more conservation education, programs that will actually help communities understand the value of the trees that they have, the biodiversity around them, and therefore being able to connect between food systems, biodiversity loss, and how our simple act of restoring nature, ensuring the small microbial biodiversity in the soil is protected, and ensuring that farmers actually utilize organic ways of crop growing, then that makes them see the value of conservation, the value of addressing biodiversity loss, and the value of also doing restoration programs to solve the climate crisis. So my day-to-day engagements are around creating awareness, but also doing the work on the ground to showcase that nature and biodiversity and also climate crisis are not all separate. They are the same crisis. In Kenya, we are seeing it, and we are doing our ambitions towards 10% forest cover by 2030. Now I understand we're almost there in 2022. But also in Africa, how do we then work with you to exactly explore opportunities around the local areas? For instance, on tree growing, on tree nursery establishment, on tea fertilizer production, and then creating new livelihoods for themselves. So yes, all these are interconnected, and we can never ever separate them.
Thank you so much. We'll now hear from Dr. Solange Bandiaki Baji. She is the president of Rights and Resources Group, and previously led their Africa program. She has been a powerful advocate for the voices of indigenous peoples and local communities, but also for the voices of women and girls in rights, in climate, and in nature conservation. So I want to introduce Solange, who's a friend of mine and get to work with regularly. We have weekly calls. I want to ask you about conservation and the way that conservation is approached, and why a rights-based approach to conservation is critical, both in the biodiversity space and the COP coming up in Montreal in a few weeks, but also in work to preserve forests in the climate space.
Thank you very much, Brian, and hello to everyone. First, I would like to thank Campaign for Nature for allowing me to be part of this inspiring panel, and really youth and people doing work on the ground. It's very inspiring. Thank you also for allowing me to be part of this, because I'm feeling young today, being part of this conversation. And I think most of the things have been said, and what the three panelists already said is really music to my ears. First, I would like to say the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are two sides of one coin. We cannot talk about one without really thinking about the other one. So coming up with solutions, really, we need to look into these two crises together. So that's one thing, and I think my brother from Africa already mentioned that. But also when we talk about nature-based solutions, we need to think about peoples-based solutions, because without the people in it, we cannot really talk about nature-based solutions. And here, when I talk about people, I refer to indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant people, but also men, women, and youth within those communities. Because generally, when we talk about community, we think about it as a very homogeneous, but we need to really unpack and recognize the work that youth and women are really doing in terms of biodiversity conservation, but also climate change mitigation and adaptation. And what I can say really about conservation is that we cannot keep on doing conservation like from a colonial approach or post-colonial approach, meaning that referring only to national parks or protected areas created by government. The reason why we cannot do fortress conservation is that right now, community-based conservation is the solution. If we recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, research have shown that in areas where the rights of indigenous peoples and local community are recognized, we have high biodiversity conservation. We also have high carbon storage. So it's very important to really think about community-based or right-based conservation, because that's really the key at this point. And for that, when we talk about climate change policies, conservation policies, we need to see how these communities can be part of the decision-making processes and not just come with top-down approaches, because that will not really take into account their own solutions. We need to also appreciate their historical contribution, because indigenous peoples, for example, have been managing or preserving biodiversity for millennia. This is not new, and when we talk about nature-based solution, we talk about it as if this is something really new and we need to support them. Like my sister was saying, let's give them the money because they are the ones who have been doing it. Let's just support those initiatives. They have the capacity. And I think we need maybe to build the capacity of the donors to really understand what's really going on the ground. And that way they will really see that the solutions already exist. It's just more about trust and also putting the money in front of the right people. And I think that's what I can say just to start this conversation. But again, this is very inspiring.
You mentioned money, and I think that's important. We've seen studies, and Rights Resources has come up and helped partner on some of the studies that show that very little climate and very little biodiversity money makes it to communities. You've also been a leader in helping to rectify that situation. Tell us a little bit about what needs to happen from a structural standpoint to get that money to the ground and what you're working on that.
For us at the Rights and Resources Initiative, which is a global coalition of right holders organization, more than 150 from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, really promoting the legal recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant, and youth and women within those communities. What we realize is that if you look at the funding, only 1% of the climate funding has been going to supporting indigenous peoples and local community. Only 1%. So that's a fundamental challenge that we need to really look into. And as my sister was saying, the 1.7 billion pledge that was made in Glasgow, they released a report last week here at COP, which showed that only 17% of that 1.7 billion has reached to indigenous peoples and local communities. So for us at the Rights and Resources Initiative, what we are saying, we need to come up with new mechanism, funding mechanism that will make sure that the funds goes directly to the people on the ground. And we've created in collaboration, partnership with Campaign for Nature, the Community Land Rights Conservation Finance Initiative, also known as Clarify. So Clarify is a global funding mechanism that aims to collect public and private funding and re-grant to indigenous peoples and local communities. And like I said, the RRI coalition is mainly composed of right holders. So we want to make sure that the funding that we can collect goes directly to supporting those local organizations on the ground. In addition to Clarify also, I think you have been hearing there are many indigenous people-led like funding mechanisms that have been created. In Indonesia, for example, AMAN, which is one of the largest indigenous networks, they have created their own funding mechanism. If you go to Central America, the Mesoamerican Alliance, they created the Mesoamerican Fund. In Brazil, we have the Podali Fund to really work with indigenous people in the rainforest. So right now, we are seeing a movement of funding mechanism created and led by indigenous peoples and local communities. And I think the donors should really make sure that funding goes to supporting those indigenous-led organizations. Another challenge is that most of the funding that donors are giving around climate either goes to government or to multilateral organizations. But also experience have shown that it has not been really trickling down to the local level. So with Clarify and all these funding mechanisms, and as my sister was saying, even without this funding mechanism, these organizations on the ground, they have been doing work for more than decades. How can we make sure that the funding goes directly to supporting them? But also the funding has to be fit for purpose, meaning that we cannot treat these local organizations, indigenous organizations, as Western NGOs. You cannot have the same requirement. And funding, for example, has to be flexible. It has to be long-term. We cannot just come and say, oh, in 1 year you have to deliver. Let them decide how long it will take for them to deliver. It has to be gender inclusive, because most of the time, the funding going down is not really reaching women's organization or indigenous women's organization. How do you make sure that those women's organizations have access to direct funding? So there's a lot more that we can say really about this funding, but I think we are at a moment, or a critical moment, where if we really want to tackle the two crises, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, we need to make sure that funding goes directly to supporting indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant youth, and women within those communities.
Thank you, Solange. We're going to have a few moments for audience questions, but before we get to that, I just want to see if any of our panelists would like to reflect on any things that other panelists raised or have additional remarks they want to make before we go to questions.
I actually would like to add on both your statements and, like you say, our African brother's statement. I think we should reevaluate. We are saying educate the communities or teach them things, and the fact that they don't know, they actually know a lot more about their environment than we do. They are the best people to tell you what tree is this, what's the connection between this tree and this bacteria. We are the ones coming in with a different approach, assuming things on our own external perspective. So I don't think they need educating, because they've been doing conservation, like you say, for millennia. We are the ones that need educating. So perhaps instead of imposing systems of conservation into these local communities, it's actually us in towns, in major towns, that actually need to reevaluate our ways of being and understand the impact that our resource consumption has, instead of forcing others to be limited. They have a saying that it's like making us comfortable in our own poverty. So we want them to live in a certain lifestyle, but we are living in a different lifestyle. So I think it's reevaluation of ourselves instead of introducing and imposing systems into these local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. May I also just add that I keep saying that we need to move from an egocentric economic model to an ecocentric economic model. And I say this noting that yesterday I saw a report being published about the world pushing more for restoration. And the idea is governments and leaders are only factoring in the carbon sequestration aspect of trees. But to me, I believe restoration is much more than that, just the carbon capture and carbon storage that we are pushing for. We have to think about biodiversity. We have to center exactly what my fellow panelists have said, like the rights of communities, the right to food, the right to ecosystem integrity across the sectors. Then how do we ensure that while we are pushing for 30 by 30, we are not just doing it from a very unilateral approach, but more in a very diverse complexity, and ensuring that exactly we rethink how we are financing groups. This bit of top-down approach, I think it's not working, and we need to be honest with ourselves. How do we trust young people? How do you trust farmers? How do you trust indigenous communities enough to support with finances to be able to scale up the initiatives, which, by the way, they've been doing over the years? How do we stay true to ourselves to ensure that by pushing for 30 by 30, we are not merely just talking about the already conserved territories by indigenous communities, but actually that our governments and our NGOs are pushing forward to establish new grounds and really collaborate with already existing frameworks from IPLCs and other groups to further drive ambition, further drive our restoration. And I believe if we can do that, we'll be doing service to humanity, we'll be doing service to nature, and for sure, we can overcome the two crises.
Sorry, one last thing. I just wanted to add that what you were saying, Dr. Solange, about the timelines, I was really like, yes, because something that I think I'm going to the wrong panels these last 2 weeks because I haven't heard anyone talk about the importance of following community timelines. It's been like the target is 2030, the target is 2025. There's no recognition of like, for these targets to be met, we need to go down to the timelines that are at the community level. So I just want to thank you for highlighting that because as I said, I haven't heard that once in the last 2 weeks.
Okay, we're going to take some audience questions here, and please direct your questions to either one of the panelists or the panelists as a whole. Remember, we have Kaluki, KM, Curlin, and Solange here. Anyone have a question that they'd like to ask the panelists? Yes.
Hi, thanks everyone for all your insights. I think as someone from Southeast Asia, you can see that the representation at COP is dismal and also very important. And I wanted to direct this question to KM to see, as we close off COP27 and in the lead up to COP15, what are the key things that Southeast Asian nations, those on the ground, are really calling for? And how can everyone else support those calls?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So representation is something that's really important for our region. We're constantly getting left behind. And a classic example is just the time zones. We're never on the right meeting times. And I think that's really curtailed our participation in a lot of things. I do hope for especially our heads of state that we do step up. I think that we have, for those of you who are in Southeast Asia or in those areas, we have a campaign, 30 by 30, 30x30sea.org. We also have an Instagram page. I want to see lots of follows after this. But this is all about trying to get our leaders to actually listen to us and turn up. Because I think what happens also is, in my experience anyway, because we are so far away and geographically and time zone wise, we can get left behind. Often we kind of go, okay, well, no one's looking at us anyway, and so we don't have to turn up. And so I think that it's really important for all of us that are connected to East and Southeast Asian countries and networks to really urge our participation, because I think that also nobody ever calls out that we're never at these events. And so I think that it's really important for us to remember that please don't leave APAC behind. And if you know people in the APAC region, also encourage them to be a part of these events and that what we do actually matters. We punch way above our weight in Southeast Asia. We make up 3% of global landmass, but account for over 20% of global biodiversity. So there's no way we're getting to 30 by 30 if what we're protecting are the important bits without Southeast Asia.
Wow, thank you so much. My name is Teresa Mudhoni from Kenya. I do appreciate you are the best. Like, this is my last event as I leave home, but I'll go a very happy person because I have heard the voices from the crowd. I want to tell, I have heard KM say like, you are very far. You are far from what? We need to go to the COPs in Asia also. Like, we should not leave other areas just because it's far from what? Like, we need to make sure like everybody is involved where you are. We are all in this earth together and we have to work together. Nobody should be told that you are very far. We are all together, and if we lose this world, if we lose Earth, this is our life support system. So we have to work together. So it's not a question, but to appreciate you and to tell you, I'm so happy. I go a happy person.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, then I'm going to ask our panelists to add some concluding remarks. We've heard about the need to integrate climate and nature, that these issues are two sides of the same coin, as Solange said. We've heard about the need to make sure that youth are engaged, that indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendants are listened to and centered, and their approaches to conservation are involved in this. We've heard about the need for a large global vision, but local implementation at a time scale that is appropriate for local communities. And we've heard a little bit about the why. Why are we all in this work? What is inspiring us about these places, about these communities, for what we're trying to do? So I want to offer the panelists any chance to speak of some final words. What would you tell the people who are finalizing the negotiations here in the Climate COP? What do they need to know about going to Montreal for the Biodiversity COP? And what words of advice would you offer them as some concluding remarks? We can start from the right and go left.
Thank you. You know what? We all can do it. That's what I believe. I'm youth, and I'm seeing first a shout out to the Africa Youth Caravan, to COP27 delegation that is here. We brought about over 21 youth to actually, exactly from what you say, to be part of this negotiation and actually meet our leaders and other compatriots to hear one another, share our solutions, and actually see what we can take back home. With that said, I think the global biodiversity framework is very much needed, and it's needed for nature, for people, and for livelihoods. We cannot afford to keep negotiating without action on the ground, and I think this is what our world leaders, our negotiators need to know. The crises are not waiting for us. We have to style up, we have to deliver the financing, and we have to know that, again, like I said, it's not so expensive to fund youth, it's not so expensive to fund farmers, it's not so expensive to fund women and indigenous groups. We just need to trust us and allow us to operate along our own timelines. Do not impose ideas on us. Listen to us, and let's see how we can create solutions moving forward. And then I'll conclude by saying that a few projects actually happening in Africa. I want to mention Duape, that I've somehow gotten to know, and it's on how youth are actually using nature-based solutions and combining that with technology to drive action on the ground and create livelihoods for themselves. And for me, I believe if youth are doing this, surely all leaders need to look the other way and see how they can support. There's an upcoming project in Kenya, is a pilot in Uka, again utilizing the power of nature-based solutions to create ecopreneurship opportunities and livelihoods for youth across our Africa. So if we can do this, I think 30 by 30 and other big campaigns can actually come to be, because we are trusting young people, we are giving them the finances that we need, and already young people are fundraising for this. So if we can do this, I believe other compatriots, partners, and countries can really come and support us to actually implement our global goals for that 2030, but also beyond that, because I think these timelines have to also match with action, and we have to really see the other way and really bring the funds closer to youth and some of these groups that need to do the work on the ground. Thank you.
I have two asks. One, I don't know if you know, but currently our heads of state are not going to be at the Biodiversity COP in December. Please tweet to them. They need to come and tweet your environmental ministers to also put pressure on the heads of state. That's my first ask. And my second ask is for those of us who've been involved in the negotiations, there's a lot of room for improvement for the facilitating of the negotiations. We really risk losing credibility of the Biodiversity COP if we do not finalize an agreement at the end of this year. So for all of us that are involved, I hope that you can tweet the right people and really urge our heads of state and for our country delegations to bring our best negotiators and our best diplomats to close the deal. Thank you.
I think what I have to say is very simple. And I don't like to incline the conversation towards my African origins, and I'm sure in other parts of the world you have the same. So basically in Africa, we have a history of oral tradition. And a lot of comments, a lot of research say, well, things need to be written to be remembered. But there might be a reason for our ancestors to have it made oral tradition. Because you can write a lot of things, and things will be put into a corner. But if you have an elder around the fire speaking to the young people, they will listen. And I think that's something that we're not doing. We're not listening to each other. There's this, in Angola, because of being secluded because of the war, we still have a lot of traditional systems of management of land and culture. And there's a term that they use, it's called Ngala Okola. Translated, it's something like sacred power. And they say, living without friendship is to die without a grave. And if you substitute friendship for partnership or for connection, the way we're connected to each other and the way we are connected to the environment, then you should, again, rethink what we are and how we are connected. Thank you.
3 points for me. One is a wish. I wish that one day we can talk about a joint COP, right? Climate and biodiversity COP. I believe that will be cost efficient because it will allow us to maybe have in one place, but also in terms of carbon footprint, that will be very helpful. So let's think about that. And the second is I'm hoping that as part of the resolutions and outcome of this COP, there will be clear mention of the link between climate change and biodiversity, and hopefully that can be brought into COP15 in Montreal. And over there in Montreal too, I'm hoping that the leadership role of indigenous peoples, local community in conservation would be really valued. And last, I wanted to come to the friendship, the partnership, the collaboration. It is time for North-South, South-South to really think about collaborating around all these issues. And that will make us really more inclusive and talk about more about equity and really thinking about not only our own continent, but how all these issues that are global issues that touch everyone, how can we come together as partners, as friends, to really deal with the climate crisis, but also the biodiversity crisis. Thank you again for allowing me to be part of this very inspiring panel. This is my last panel of COP, and I'm very happy. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for attending today. This is, again, Solutions Day, and we know the solutions are right here in the communities, and we hope that the negotiators here in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Montreal listen to these solutions. I hope all of you leave knowing that there are solutions, that in spite of some of the dour news we hear in the media about things, that there are hopeful, effective partnerships happening all the time, and we're seeing it right here. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for this. Thank you all for participating in this. Thanks to National Geographic for helping put on this event, and for the Nature Zone for hosting us, Nature Positive Zone for hosting us today. Thanks all, and have a great rest of the COP and a safe travel home.